Hi, this is Chris, and thanks for watching the very first tutorial for DIY sci-fi. If you haven't checked out the blog yet, if you're catching this on YouTube, the blog is now found at diysci-fi.wordpress.com. And of course, it's a blog dedicated to learning the tricks and the tools and the techniques for creating our own special effects and visual effects for sci-fi films. It's a great time to be making movies. You can do just about anything on a PC or a Mac these days. But we kind of worship at the altar of being able to take special effects and visual effects and tell a really excellent story. The story's the king, but man, if you get some really good effects, it can sure go a long way into adding to that great story that you've got to tell. For the very first tutorial, we're going to start off by creating a starfield. Now, of course, obviously, science fiction, for a lot of people, when you think science fiction, they think of their favorite sci-fi movies that are set in space. You know, I mean, a lot of my favorite movies are from the early 80s, that sort of era, that golden age space movie era, as far as I'm concerned, with the Wrath of Khan and, you know, obviously the Star Wars movies and so on and so forth. And out of all the different things, all the different elements you might need for a movie that's kind of along that vein, starfield is going to be right up at the top. And of course, a starfield seems easy enough to do. It's just white dots on a black background, right? Well, not quite. You can do that, and it can just be white dots on a black background, but you're going to find that that's not real satisfying if you put a lot of time into making an awesome spaceship or making a really convincing planet. The starfield, the lack of the quality in the starfield can really blow it, and from projects I've done, I have seen this many, many, many times. So the real question is how do you create a really convincing starfield? And there are 1,000,001 ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you today the way that I found to do that seems to work for me, and plus it's flexible enough that it's going to give you a lot of resources to really customize the scene that you need. To start off with, some of the first things that you really need to know before you even get started on creating your starfield is you need to know what resolution you're going to be using for your final scene. So if you're going to be shooting, 720p, then you need to make sure that your starfield's going to hold up to a 720p resolution. In my case, that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be doing 720p, and fortunately for us, Photoshop has a setting for that. Also, you need to have some kind of artistic direction. Now, I know that seems a little strange if you're really just wanting to jump into this, but of course, the whole thing about DIY sci-fi is that we're all about telling a really good story, and that generally starts with planning. Lots and lots of planning for every scene, everything you do. So in this case, having an idea of what kind of scene you're going to be creating, is it suspenseful, is it quiet, what kind of composition are you going to have, that may very well play into what kind of stars you want to do. Maybe you don't want a lot of stars. Maybe it needs to be a little sporadic and spaced out and kind of quiet and empty. Or maybe it's sort of frenetic and there's a lot going on and you're really looking at the majesty of space, in which case it's going to sort of change what you're going to see. So what I really recommend is study pictures of space. Best thing you can do is look at actual photos from NASA. It certainly doesn't begin and end there, because sometimes you're going to see photos of actual space that, believe it or not, even though it's real, won't look all that great if you put it in a sci-fi film, because people have sort of an expectation of what space is going to look like. So we are going to start off by creating our document. We're going to go up to File, New, and we're going to go to the presets, go down to Film and Video. It has a setting, if you take a look, for HDTV 720p. The frames per second doesn't really matter because, of course, we're doing a still image, but we're going to select that, hit OK, and there we go. And ready to get started. As you've probably guessed, we need to start off with a black background. So I'm going to go over to my color picker. I'm going to choose black. And I'm going to go to my paint bucket right there. And presto, you're halfway home. Okay, now I've got the background there. I'm not going to work on the background because I want to keep that nice and fresh. I want to be able to work on the layers separately. So I'm going to go down here to the little page, create a new layer. I'm going to name this layer Stars 1 because we're going to have more than one of them. And now I need to create some stars. Now the way you're going to do this is by using the brush tool. I'm going to start off by modifying just a plain round brush. Just look around in your brushes and find something that's just plain and round and a dot like this. I'm going to change my color to white. That's what you want. Okay, obviously not quite this large. But in order to get this to look like stars, one of the first things that you need to recognize about space is that stars are not uniform. If you look at those reference photos, it's not just all a bunch of white dots. If you do that, yeah, you can fool somebody for maybe a split second, but then after that, it's just not a convincing space scene. So what we need to do is we need to adjust the size, obviously, because they're not quite this large. So we're going to turn down the master diameter, make it very, very small. Again, that's a little too small. Make it very, very small. Again, keeping in mind the scale you're going to be working at. Okay, so you can just do that, but you see I get these little trails right there. So the way we're going to make this a little easier on us is we're going to go to brush tip shape. There we go. And we're going to take this spacing bar, crank it way up, and as you can see in the preview window, that separates out tiny little dots as you go. So it makes it easier just to go in here and make tons and tons of dots. By the way, I'm using a Wacom tablet, a drawing tablet, or Wacom tablet, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But the same stuff works with a mouse too. A little bit easier with a tablet. If you don't have one, I highly recommend getting one. They're really getting very affordable and are indispensable for doing stuff like this. But okay, so the shape dynamics, I've increased the spacing, but also I want them to be a little more random because after all, as we said, space is not uniform. So for that, I'm going to go into shape dynamics. I am going to increase the size jitter that you see at the top of the screen there. I'm going to go up to about 75%. That's pretty good. Now what that does, let me increase my brush size here so you can see. What that does is that gives us some of the stars big, some of the stars small, makes it nice and random. But we also want to adjust some of the opacity because we don't want them to be the same brightness either. There's depth in space, and so you're going to have different brightness levels of the stars you're looking at. So I'm going to go to Other Dynamics, and I'm going to take the opacity jitter and crank it way up here. And I've got it set to pin pressure, so I'm going to turn that off. But opacity jitter and crank it up to about 75%. Now that means when I touch these little dots down, not only are the sizes sort of random, but the opacity is random. Some of them are kind of faded out, some of them are bright white, and that's exactly what we want. So now we're ready to create some stars, and I'm just going to start by tapping my stylus. In your case, you're just clicking your mouse and going kind of in a random pattern. I'm not paying too much attention to being too random. I'm not really doing anything other than just letting my hands sort of dance up and down on my tablet. And you can see we're already getting something that looks a lot like space. Now I'm going to spare you covering this entire thing, so we're going to jump ahead and have our stars 1 layer finished. Okay, and we've skipped ahead here. We've got our stars 1 layer covered in stars. And if we were to stop right here, it's not entirely embarrassing. It does look an awful lot like stars, but it's not exactly up to film quality yet. It's okay for a really brief shot. If you've got something that you've spent some time on creating, like a planet or a ship or a space station or what have you, or even a nighttime sky perhaps, and you leave it at this, I think you'll find that in the compositing later in After Effects, you're not going to be entirely happy with it. It's not entirely real yet. To sort of help us get a little bit more realistic and a little bit more filmic, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look, first of all, at how bright the whole scene is. It's just very contrasty. The bright whites are really bright, and the black, it just seems a little fake so far. What we need to do is create a sense of depth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to the Layers window, and I'm going to take the opacity and drag it down. I'm going to drag it down. It looks like here about 56 or so. Just play around with it and think about what your scene is actually going to look like. And remember, you really want to get a sense that these are really far off stars that you might be able to, travel to. So they're way, way out there. Little bitty suns, but they're so distant that they're kind of fuzzy. All right, so that's not too bad. I'll take that. But we're going to create another layer, as I said, and we're going to name this layer Stars 2. And this layer, we're going to just do exactly what we did on stars 1, but we're going to create a few less stars. And I am going to scale my brush up a little bit. Now, I know I'm not going over here to scale my brush up. That's because if you use the left and right bracket keys on your keyboard, you can very quickly and very easily scale the brush up and down in Photoshop. So I'm going to scale the brush up a little bit, and I'm going to create another layer of stars. I'm not going to do quite as many on this one. Okay, now I've laid down another layer of stars. I'll go over here and touch the little eye on stars 1 and make that disappear so you can see what we've added. Kind of fill in a couple of gaps here. This is the stars layer 2 I'm working on. Sort of a less dense star field. We're going to leave these stars a little brighter, but in order to really sell this as space, you notice these are still a little contrasty, very bright white, not entirely realistic looking upon scrutiny. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give these a slight halo. The way we're going to do that is with the stars 2 layer selected, I'm going to hit Control J. You're going to get stars 2 copy. I'm going to drag that underneath the original stars 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to crank it up a little bit here. You don't want to crank it up too much because then you'll lose it. I just want to crank it until the edges of these stars really look fuzzy. It's pretty subtle. Let me zoom in a bit here, drag down. You can see here, you see this big bright one right here, what it's doing to it, making it a little bit fuzzy. Now, you notice that I could have just done that on the stars 2 layer, but I really wanted to keep that core brightness. If you use it on that original layer, it would tend to dull the stars a little bit, and I still want them kind of bright. So there we go. We've got our stars 1 layer, which are still pretty distant. Turning those on and off now. We've got the stars 2 layer, which are our bright stars, and then behind that, we've added that Gaussian blur. And right now, I think we've got a pretty convincing space scene, but we're not quite finished yet. There's something that I discovered the first couple of the composites that I did, putting a spaceship against a black background. And that's that if the black is just too black, very often it still kind of feels a little fake. So what I have gotten in the habit of doing is actually giving space a very, very, very subtle hint of color. Select the background layer here, and I'm going to create a new layer, and we're just going to call this color 1. Okay, I'm going to go over to my color picker here. I'm going to choose kind of a bluish color, nothing slightly electric, but kind of deep blue. Hit OK. I'm going to select my fill tool and fill it in there, and we have something very bright and sort of cartoony. We're going to go over to opacity in the layers window, crank it way down. I mean way down. Okay, there's 0. And I'm actually going to put it at about 5. Now that is very, very subtle. You're not really going to notice it to look at it here. It's probably not looking all that different on your screen, but when you composite that in, it may just make the difference between making space seem a little flat and digital and more like a real place. We're going to leave that there. Also, the stars here, bright white. Let's say we're going for sort of an early 80s Wrath of Khan kind of feel. We want to give the stars a little bit of color. I'm going to go up to my stars 2 layer, also create another layer. I'm going to keep the same blue color. I'm going to also use my fill tool, drop it in there, and of course we can't see anything, but that's because we need to change the layer mode here to color. Ah, that's pretty cool. Nice and bright and electric and a little bit too much. We're going to go, as you probably guessed, to the opacity, and we are just going to scale it back to where it's just kind of a silvery blue over the whole layer, and there we have it. I would say a pretty convincing star field. Check out DIY Sci-Fi's blog at DIYSci-Fi, one word, .wordpress.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at DIY Sci-Fi, and be looking for another tutorial sometime next week. And until then, go and make a movie.